scorch in Arizona sun, a $2 million dream house stands flawless, yet hauntingly quiet. There's no laughter, no footsteps, no kids tearing around the yard that was originally envisioned to unite a family. This was supposed to be Kody Brown's redemption. A symbol of unity after years of chaos, heartbreak, and public scandal. A new start. Or at least, that's what he had convinced himself. But as the months dragged on, something became starkly clear. Nobody was coming. The children, once the very pulse of his enormous family, had tuned out. Not just in anger, but in sheer exhaustion. Were finished waiting for a father who never showed up when they needed him. Finished hearing promises that were always made too late. And most importantly, they were finished pretending that the hurt could be fixed with drywall and desert rock. To onlookers, it appeared to be a picture of success. A man who had built an empire, a family of 23, and a home big enough to house them all. But behind those walls, the reality echoed louder than any cheer of approval. You can't buy forgiveness. Because this wasn't just a house, it was a monument to everything that had gone wrong. The distance, the favoritism, the missed birthdays, the shattered trust. Every window held a reflection of a face that wasn't there. Every room reminded him of who had refused to come back. And as Kody stood in the doorway of that vast, vacant house, one question plagued him above all others. What if the family I built was never really mine to begin with? Because this isn't really a story about a house. It's about how a father's grand vision became his greatest regret. Why his children finally said goodbye for good. But, to understand how it all got to this point, why the Brown kids lost faith in the mansion. And the man who built it, we have to go back to where Kody's illusion began. Every family has a breaking point. For Kody Brown, his was disguised as a solution, a grand plan for harmony. Sketched on the sands of Coyote Pass, he told everyone the same thing. Once the house is built, everything will fall into place. He said it with conviction, even as Christine was packing her boxes, even as Janelle was moving away from him. Even as his older children stopped answering his calls. This was never about a house. It was about control, a last-ditch effort to rebuild what had already crumbled beyond recognition. There was Kody on the construction site, pointing proudly to a skeleton of beams and nails. Aerial shots soared over the sprawling property, wide open spaces, golden light, and a man smiling for the camera. But underneath that smile was fear. The fear of being left behind. The fear of losing the one thing that had once defined him, the family that made him famous. He thought that if he just poured enough money into concrete, if he gave his kids a space big enough to gather again, maybe they would forgive him. Maybe they would finally see the father he still wanted to be. But his children didn't need walls. They needed warmth. They didn't need a mansion. They needed memories, the kind he had stopped showing up to create. The Brown family didn't fall apart overnight. It disintegrated in slow motion. Each broken promise was another crack in the foundation. Each argument created a fracture that no construction crew could ever patch. Kody wasn't building a home, he was building a distraction. A way to look busy, while ignoring the pain he'd caused. A way to convince himself he was still in charge. When in reality, everyone had already walked away. And as the mansion neared completion, his children's visits became fewer. And then they stopped completely. The group texts went silent. Family dinners became faded memories. And every time he called, there was always a reason they couldn't come. "Dad, we're busy. Maybe next month. We'll see." Excuses that cut deeper than he would ever admit. Because deep down, Kody knew the truth. His children weren't staying away from the house. They were staying away from him. And still, he told himself it was temporary. That once they saw what he had built for them, they would come running back. He hoped for it. He had to hope for it. What he failed to understand was that his kids had already said their goodbyes, long before the first stone was laid. Before the mansion, before the silence, there were moments that looked like love. Family dinners around a long, wooden table. Laughter echoing through shared kitchens. 4 wives, 18 children, a perfect picture of togetherness. Or at least, the pretense of it. But even then, in the so-called golden years, there were cracks that no one wanted to look at too closely. Forgotten birthdays. promises of a father who was always delayed, discussions that turned into arguments, and arguments that never really ended. Kody Brown was a man with too many voices pulling at him, too many expectations weighing on his shoulders. And over time, one truth became impossible to ignore. When you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to most. The children started to notice. They saw who got the attention and who didn't, who was celebrated and who was dismissed. Christine's kids watched quietly as their father spent holidays somewhere else. Janelle's boys felt like guests in their own family. Mary's daughter would ask when Dad's coming back, and no one ever had an answer. It wasn't one single fight that broke them. It was the slow, crushing weight of 1,000 small heartbreaks. Moments like the day Gabe called his dad on his birthday, only for Kody to forget what day it was. Or the nights Christine had to tell her kids, "Don't wait up for him. He's not coming tonight." Every single moment left a scar. Every silence shouted louder than words ever could. And yet, when Kody looked in the mirror, he didn't see what they saw. He saw a man trying his best, blind to the wreckage he was leaving behind. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold truths. We'll see you in the next one. He saw a father doing his best, a man sacrificing for his family. His children saw something else altogether, a man who only appeared when it was convenient, who insisted on respect but had forgotten how to pay it, who desired to be loved without deserving it. The scars cut deep, and by the time he attempted to mend them, it was too late. Because healing is about being present, it's about saying sorry. And for years, Kody provided neither. So when he stood before that big new mansion, grinning for the cameras, his children weren't proud. They were exhausted. Exhausted with pretending. Exhausted with forgiving. Exhausted with waiting. And one by one, they started to let go. But letting go wasn't simple. It came with guilt, confusion, and tears they never showed on television. They still loved their father, they just couldn't trust him anymore. And once lost, trust doesn't rebuild itself with bricks and mortar. By the time the mansion was complete, the foundation of his family had already collapsed. But Kody didn't see it that way. In his mind, he was building a house to heal. To start fresh, he didn't realize it was already over. When people lose something precious, they often grasp for something else to fill the void. For Kody Brown, the substitute was wood, glass, and stone. The mansion he swore would bring everyone back together. He stood before the cameras, gesturing toward architectural drawings, his eyes filled with conviction. This house will bring us together again. But behind that confidence was fear of being forgotten, a fear of facing himself. He wasn't building for his children. He was building for his reputation. Because as the world watched him unravel, as fans began to question his every move, he had to prove something, that he was still in control. Control of his wives. Control of his children. Control over a narrative that had already slipped from his grasp. Every wall he erected wasn't a step toward family, it was a barrier between him and them. He called it a new beginning, but to his children, it looked like another monument to his ego. Zay mourned Garrison gone. Relationships fractured. Kody was picking out marble countertops and high-end fixtures. As they tried to rebuild their lives in quiet dignity, he was planning drone shots of his new family compound. He wasn't healing, he was hiding. He told himself the kids just needed time, that once they saw what he'd built, they'd come running back. He imagined reunions in the great room, holidays by the grand staircase, laughter echoing through hallways he'd designed himself. Bavodes. Those sounds never came. Only silence. Because forgiveness isn't built from lumber, and love doesn't live in square footage. To him, this mansion was proof that he could still provide. Still be the patriarch. Still command a family that was slipping through his fingers. But what he failed to see was that every nail hammered into that house was another reminder to his children of just how far he'd strayed from what mattered. They didn't need a new roof, they needed a reason to trust him again. And trust doesn't have a floor plan. So, when Kody finally walked into that finished house, sunlight streaming through pristine windows, his voice echoing off empty rooms. He thought it was the beginning of reconciliation. But for his children, it was the final confirmation. The man they once called Dad was now just a stranger in a haunted house. He thought he was building a bridge. He didn't realize he was building a border. And soon, that border would become permanent. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. A family doesn't shatter like glass, it erodes like sand. But for the Brown children, there was a single moment-to-moment that told them, this is it. We're done. And it started with a phone call that was never returned. It was Gabe who tried first, a son who once adored his father. He reached out just once, hoping to reconnect after months of silence. He wanted to talk, to share, to heal. But when Kody finally picked up, he didn't hear his son's pain. He heard disrespect. And instead of listening, he lectured. That call ended with a hang-up. And with it something inside Gabe closed forever. Later, in a raw moment of vulnerability, he confessed to the cameras, "That was the last time I talked to my dad. It was on my birthday." He forgot. That clip broke hearts across America. But for the Brown family, it was more than a TV moment. It was the symbolic collapse of everything. Because when a child stops reaching out, it's not because they've stopped loving. It's because they've stopped hoping. And that loss of hope spread like wildfire. From Gabe to Garrison, to the younger kids who watched in silence. From Janelle's children to Christine's to Mary's etch. One feeling the same quiet truth. Dad wasn't showing up anymore. They invited him to milestones. He didn't come. They needed him for hard conversations. He avoided them. They asked for love. He gave them logic. "I've done my best," he would say in interviews. "I can't make them respect me." But respect isn't demanded. It's earned moment by moment, year after year. And he had spent too many of those years looking somewhere else. The final straw came not in words, but in what the children saw on their screens. Set pictures of Kody and Robyn in their new homes, smiling, decorating, celebrating holidays. The very house that was supposed to be for all of us. But now, it was clear it wasn't. For them, it never would be. While they were piecing together the broken fragments of their family, he was already building a new one. And the children, they stopped calling. They stopped visiting. They stopped waiting for him to change. Because sometimes, absence is the loudest message of all. That mansion became a symbol. Not of family, but of finality. It stood tall, proud, expensive and empty. Because the people it was built to house had already decided to move on. And in that silence, Kody Brown learned the truth: you can lose your family, even while they're still alive. But it doesn't stop there. Because after the silence came something even harder for Kody to handle: the voices of his own children. Sharing their truth with the world, for years, they stayed quiet. They sat beside their father as he explained his choices on TV, watched him craft his own narrative. But silence can only last so long. And eventually, the truth finds its voice. Started with whispers on fan forum scripted posts, subtle comments from the kids online. Then, one by one, those whispers turned into declarations. Garrison, the son who once called his dad his hero, now referred to him as a man who made everything about control. He spoke of favoritism, of how some siblings felt invisible while others were protected, about the growing wall between Kody and everyone except Robyn. If you've been following this family's journey, you know how deep these wounds run. What are your thoughts on Kody's attempt to rebuild with a mansion instead of mending relationships? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that captivate us. Then, there was Gabe, his voice quivering but determined, talking about how the pandemic exposed what the cameras never did. It wasn't about safety anymore, he said. It was about who mattered. Fans could feel the pain in every line. They weren't trying to defy their father, they were trying to be heard. After years of being told to respect authority, they were finally declaring that respect is earned both ways. Christine's kids echoed the same pain stories of calls not returned, distant Christmases, and a deep emotional abandonment. One of them even admitted, "We quit coming because every visit ended in him justifying himself. Not asking about us." Those words cut deeper than any public criticism ever could. Because what they revealed wasn't hate, it was profound hurt. Janelle, with her children beside her, confirmed what many suspected. The distance wasn't rebellion, it was protection. They were tired of being blamed, she said softly. Tired of being guilted for loving each other. And that's when the world began to see what the cameras had hidden. These wasn't just a broken family, it was a pattern. A father who couldn't say sorry, a man too proud to apologize, and children too hurt to keep pretending. When the children finally spoke out, it wasn't for attention, it was for closure. They needed their story told before someone else could rewrite it. As their voices traveled, the mansion, once meant to be a symbol of unity, became something else entirely. It was a monument to unspoken apologies, a reminder that no matter how high you build your walls, you can't outrun the truth that follows you home. By the time the last child stopped visiting, the house was silent. But the world was louder than ever, listening, judging, and wondering how a family so large could feel so empty. But behind the headlines, Kody believed there was one person who would never betray him, who would stick by him no matter what. He was wrong. For years, Robyn Brown had been his steadfast anchor. Amid the fights, the backlash, and the tears, she was the one who stayed when everyone else left. To the world, she was his last loyal wife. But even loyalty has its limits. As the dust settled over Coyote Pass, Robyn began to see what the others had known all along. She had believed in Kody's vision, the dream of a unified family, of a single grand home that would heal all wounds. But what she got was isolation. The children's laughter she missed. The awkward silence of holidays spent with only her own kids. The online whispers labeling her the favorite, as if that was a title she had chosen. Behind her on-camera smiles, she was a prisoner in a fortress disguised as a home. Whenever she'd ask, why won't they come, Kody gave her the same answers. They're being disrespectful. They're ungrateful. They've turned against us. But slowly, those words started to ring hollow. Because deep down, Robyn knew you can't call it rebellion when it's really heartbreak. The kids weren't pushing her away with hate. They were shielding themselves from more pain. And the more she defended Kody, the further they drifted. Until one day, even Robyn couldn't deny the truth anymore. It was Christmas. The tree stood tall, the presents were wrapped, but the house was still. No Janelle. No Christine. No Mary. No children other than her own. Just a silence so profound, it tells you something has gone for good. As she looked around the mansion, Kody had called a fresh start. A heart-shattering reality hit her. The dream wasn't destroyed by outsiders, it was broken from the inside. In a tearful confession, she admitted, I wanted this house to be full of family. But now it's just walls. This was the first crack in her loyalty. Not because she stopped loving Kody, but because she finally saw what he couldn't. This wasn't a family anymore. It was one man defending his pride while losing everyone who ever loved him. Even Robyn's own children started to feel it. They craved connection, not isolation. They missed their siblings. But every time they reached out, they were met with tension, guilt, and the same old blame. Bit by bit, Robyn's resolve crumbled. Because loyalty without truth isn't love, it's loneliness. That Christmas night, she sat beside Kody, surrounded by everything they thought would bring them happiness, and nothing that did. Maybe they'll come around, Kody whispered. Maybe, she replied, but she didn't believe it anymore. For the first time, she saw the mansion for what it truly was, not a home, but a mausoleum for dead memories. And while Robyn grappled with her fading faith, the rest of the family began something Kody never saw coming. They started to rebuild their own definition of family. Without him. Sometimes, losing someone doesn't end your story. It starts it. For the Brown children, leaving their father wasn't an act of rebellion, it was an act of healing. As the halls of that empty mansion grew cold, something beautiful began to bloom, elsewhere in living rooms and kitchens miles away from Coyote Pass. Christine took the first step. The wife who once stood silently in the background now stood in her own light. She laughed again. She traveled. She cooked dinners for her children without seeking anyone's permission. Her happiness was infectious, a quiet declaration to the rest of the family. We can move on. And we can still love each other. Her children followed suit, celebrating graduations, weddings, and new careers. Moments, once weighed down by tension, were now filled with genuine joy. The cameras caught it all. Christine dancing with her daughters, smiling wider than she had in years. The world saw freedom. But her kids saw something more. A mother who finally chose peace over pretense. Janelle's children found their own rhythm too. Garrison built his own home not to prove a point, but to be free. Gabe reconnected with his siblings, sharing inside jokes and old memories. There were tears, yes, and moments of anger. But there was also togetherness. For the first time in years, they were defining family on their own terms, free from the fear of judgment or the pressure to perform for cameras. They started visiting each other more. The distance between their homes shrank. And slowly, something incredible happened. They realized they didn't need Kody's permission to love one another. After waiting so long for him to lead, they forgot they could lead themselves. And when they did, everything changed. The Brown children, once divided by loyalty, were now united by shared grief. But instead of letting that sorrow break them, they used it as fuel. They celebrated birthdays together again. They rallied around each other through new loves, new babies, and new beginnings. They didn't erase their father, but they stopped letting his absence define their lives. We still love him, one said in an interview, but we love ourselves enough to stop waiting. That sentence became their quiet anthem, not of bitterness, but of strength. And while the mansion on Coyote Pass stood empty, its windows reflecting the sun on vacant land, life had moved on without it. That house was Kody's dream, but the family's future was no longer tied to it. Because healing doesn't need a mansion. It just needs honesty and the courage to let go of what's broken. The Brown children had finally done what their father couldn't. They built something that would last, not a house, but a home, one founded on respect, forgiveness, and truth. And though Kody wasn't part of it, his actions had, in a way, made it possible. Because sometimes, the greatest gift a broken man can give is the lesson of what not to become. They say a house isn't a home until it's filled with love. But love had long since left this place. In the vast stone rooms that once held the promise of togetherness, there was only silence. A man's footsteps echoing through hollow halls, the last echo of a dream that once was. For the first time, Kody Brown had everything he ever wanted, and no one to share it with. He had the mansion, the land, the title of patriarch. But he no longer had an audience that believed him. Too. The cameras stopped rolling, the wives had moved on, the children stopped calling. And in the silence, Kody finally heard himself. He walked past the dining table built for 20. He ran his hand along the grand staircase he'd proudly shown off on national TV. He stood in the living room where he'd once declared, "This is where we'll all come together again." But now, there was only one chair, one coffee mug, one shadow. His. That's when it hit him. The house wasn't too big, he was just too alone. All the decisions that once felt so right now rang hollow. Too. Every argument, every dismissal, every time he chose pride over compassion, they all lived here now, in the quiet between the walls. And for the first time, Kody didn't blame anyone else. He tried calling one of his sons that night. No answer. He left a message, his voice strained and uncertain. "Hey, just wanted to talk. Call me back if you want." He waited. The phone never rang. He looked around the enormous room, the space reflecting nothing but the sound of his own breathing. And that's when he whispered a truth that would never air on television, but one he would repeat in his mind forever. "I built a house and lost my family." He thought back to when the kids were little, when the chaos felt like love. He remembered camping trips, dance recitals, the early days before the bitterness set in. He tried to pinpoint when it all went wrong. Was it when he stopped listening? When he started taking sides? Or was it when he decided that being right was more important than being present? It's funny how quiet the truth is. It doesn't shout. It just sits there, waiting for you to finally pay attention. And that night, in his perfect mansion, Kody Brown finally did. He saw what everyone else had seen for years. The walls weren't holding his family in, they were holding him out. The man who dreamed of being remembered as the patriarch who built it all had become the man remembered for losing it all. But sometimes, hitting rock bottom isn't the end, it's the beginning. And somewhere, deep beneath the loneliness, Kody began to wonder if there was still time. Not to build with stone and plans, but with words he hadn't used in years. I'm sorry, too. The real mansion he needed to rebuild wasn't made of stone, it was made of trust. And that foundation would cost more than money. There comes a time in every man's life when his words mean less than his silence. For Kody Brown, that time had come. He had the house, the dream, the image of success carved into the Arizona landscape. But when the lights went out, there was no one left to turn them back on. For years, he told himself he was the one being misunderstood. That the wives were dramatic, that the kids were ungrateful. But as his footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, a terrible thought crept in. Maybe they didn't abandon him. Maybe he drove them away. He sat by the fireplace that night, the flames dancing on walls that held too many secrets. On the coffee table was a single framed photo of all his children, taken years ago. Smiling faces, an unbroken family. A memory that felt like a lie. He picked it up, tracing their faces with his thumb, and muttered to the empty room, "Where did I go wrong?" There was no answer. Because the universe doesn't respond to regret, only to action. Who wanted to call them, to apologize, to tell them he finally understood. But what do you say when the people you love have stopped listening to your voice? He typed out texts, then deleted them. Picked up the phone, then put it down. Because in his heart, he knew the truth that every proud man fears most. It might already be too late. In the distance, he could almost hear them, the laughter that once filled his life, the voices that once called him dad. Now, they were just ghosts in a house built on silence. He thought, this palace would be his monument. Instead, it became his mirror, each empty room reflecting the man he'd become, and the love he'd sacrificed to be right. Maybe he could still change. Maybe he could still be forgiven. But forgiveness requires humility. And humility was a language Kody had never learned to speak. He stood there, alone in the dark, looking out over Coyote past the land meant to be his legacy. Now, it was just a field of regret. And as the first light of dawn broke over the desert, one question hung in the air. If a patriarch loses his family, is the mansion he built a testament to his strength, or just a tomb for a ghost in his own story? This isn't the story of a man who lost everything. It's the story of a man who has one last choice, to keep living in his fortress of denial, or to finally face the truth. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't knock twice. And when it finally comes knocking, it might already be too late. What would you do if your family stopped answering your calls?